The suitcase hit the dirt first, then the canvas bag, then the 2 paper sacks, one after the other, tossed out the upstairs window like a woman emptying a drawer of things she'd been meaning to throw away for years. Wren Halladay stood in the middle of the gravel road and watched her whole life land in the dust at her feet. And she did not say a word. Because what was there to say? The curtain in the upstairs window moved once. The lace one. The one Verna ironed every other Sunday like it meant something. It moved, and then it didn't. And then the window slid shut so soft you'd have missed it if you weren't already listening for the sound of a door closing on you. And that was that. A plate did it. That was the part that would stay with her. Not a fist, not a scream, not some terrible thing a person could point to and say, "There, that's why." Just a white plate from the dish rack. Wren had washed it and dried it and set it back in the cupboard the way she'd done 1,000 times since she was tall enough to reach. And Verna came in, and Verna picked it up, and Verna held it to the window light, and Verna said, "There's a spot." There wasn't, but there didn't need to be. There had been a spot for 13 years, a spot on Wren, a spot on the bedspread, a spot on the way she chewed her toast, and the way she stood at the screen door, looking out at the rain. A spot Verna had been working her thumb against since the funeral, trying to rub it out and never could. And now the spot was out on the gravel road with everything she owned. She didn't cry. That part mattered, not because she was tough, because she was empty. There's a difference, and a man who has lived long enough knows it. Tough people still have something left to lose. Empty people just stand there and look at the suitcase and wonder if the latch is going to hold after a fall like that. She knelt down. She snapped it open. It held. Of course it held. Things built in 1958 held. That was the thing about old things. They kept together long after the people who bought them came apart. 3 changes of clothes, a pair of canvas shoes with a hole in the toe, a hairbrush, a spiral notebook with the corners gone soft, and a tin that used to hold brown sugar and now held $42. 1s and 5s a 10 she'd been saving since Easter. From minding the Pruitt twins 2 quarters a nickel. $42. That was everything standing between Wren Halladay and the rest of her life. She counted it once. She counted it again the way you do when you're sure the number's gonna change if you push at it hard enough. It didn't. 42. She tucked the tin down at the bottom of the suitcase under the clothes, the way her grandmother had taught her when she was 7. Before they took the old woman to the home in Lincoln, and she stopped knowing Wren's face. Hide your money where you'd never think to look for it, sugar. Then nobody else will either. She closed the suitcase. She stood. She brushed the dust off the back of her shorts. And she looked at the road. To her left, town. 3 miles back. A square, a feed store, a post office. People who'd known her since she was small as the Halladay girl. The one Verna took in after Eli passed. People who had made up their minds about her years ago and never bothered to open the file again. To her right, the road just kept going. Out past the grain bins, past country she'd ridden through on the school bus 100 times and never once set foot in. Country where nobody knew her name yet. Country where the only person she'd have to be was whoever she decided to be the next morning. She picked up the suitcase. She picked up the bag. She picked up the sacks 1, 2, and she turned right. Because going left was just the slow way of dying. The Nebraska sun in July does not care about you. That's the only honest way to describe it. It sits up there in a sky so blue it looks painted on, and it presses down on the top of your head, like a hand belonging to somebody who never met you but already decided you didn't deserve shade. Wren walked. She passed a mailbox leaning at the end of a long drive. She passed a field of corn so tall it whispered. When the wind moved through it, and so empty of people that she could have screamed, and nobody would have come. She didn't scream. The paper sacks cut into her fingers and she switched them to the other hand, and then she switched them back. She thought about her father. She tried not to. He'd been a quiet man. That was most of what she remembered. Quiet and tall and hands that smelled like motor oil and bay rum. He'd lifted her up to look at the moon once on a porch when she was 3, and he'd said something to her she could never get back. Just the smell of him and the feel of being held up high, and the moon so close she thought she could touch it. Then he was gone, a piece of farm equipment that should have been hauled off and replaced. He'd fixed it instead, the way he fixed everything, and the fix didn't hold. And he was 26 years old, and she was 4. And Verna kept her after that because that was what people did out here in towns like this one. They kept the dead man's child, especially when the dead man's child wasn't theirs. They kept her, and they fed her, and they bought her school clothes, and they made very sure she understood in every silence at every supper table that kept was the word that mattered. Wren walked, and the sun moved, and then she saw the sign. It was nailed sideways to a fence post, like the man who put it there hadn't cared whether anybody read it. The paint had gone the color of weak coffee. The wood was warped, but the letters held. Farmstead for sale. Ask Roy at the store. She stopped. She looked at the sign. Then she looked past it. A gate hanging half open held together with baling wire. A track of beaten-down grass running between 2 rows of overgrown hedge, disappearing down toward a stand of cottonwoods, and past the trees just barely a roof. Slate gray, tilted. The kind of roof that had been losing its argument with gravity for a long, long time. A crow called somewhere out in the corn. Wren picked up her suitcase, and she turned back toward town. Roy Tarbell had stood behind the counter of his store since before Wren was born. Before Verna was born by some accounts, though, that was probably his nephew's exaggeration, and Roy had never bothered to correct it. He was 64, round, bald on top with a mustache that had stopped being fashionable in 1948, and was making a quiet comeback among men who didn't care about fashion. He wore a denim apron over a blue work shirt, and he kept a transistor radio under the counter, tuned to the farm report, and a jar of butterscotch by the register that he handed out free to children, widows, and anybody who looked like they needed one. The bell over the door jingled at 20 to 3 on a Tuesday, and Roy looked up, and what he saw was a girl, 17 maybe. Sweat at her collar, dust on her shoes, carrying everything she owned in 3 sacks and a beat-up suitcase. The kind of girl who walked through his door maybe twice in a career, and never for a good reason. "Help you," he said. "That sign," Wren said. "Out on the post past the bend. The farm." Roy set down the inventory sheet he'd been pretending to read. "The Whitmore place," he said. "It's for sale. Has been. How long?" He scratched his chin. "Going on 3 years. Nobody bought it. Nobody wanted it." She set her sacks down by the door. She walked to the counter and put both hands flat on the wood, the way she'd seen men do when they were about to ask for something they didn't expect to get. "How much?" Roy looked at her a long moment. "Honey," he said, "that place isn't for somebody like you. How much?" He sighed. He reached under the counter and came up with a manila folder, and he opened it and he closed it, and he opened it again. "It's complicated," he said. "Tell me, Amos Whitmore died 10 years back, or," and here something moved across his face, brief as a cloud shadow, and was gone. "Or near enough. No will we ever found. No kin we could ever turn up. Place got tied to the county and I'm the trustee on it because nobody else would take the job. He paused. Transfer fee's $40. That's what it'd cost to put it in your name. 40. But Wren, she didn't react to her name. He'd known her since she was small. Of course he had. This was that kind of town. Everybody knew her name. That was half the reason she'd left. There's no power runs out there, Roy said. The well wants a new pump. There's a hole in the roof you could throw a cat through. And there's a room in that house nobody's been inside in 10 years and nobody should. He stopped like he'd said more than he meant to. He started over. It isn't livable. It's barely standing. I wouldn't sell it to my own daughter. You don't have a daughter. That's not the point. I have $42, Wren said. Roy went still. The little radio under the counter played something tiny. A weather voice. Chance of thunderstorms after sundown. Roy looked at the girl. And the girl looked at Roy. And there was no begging on her face. That was what got him later lying awake. There was no begging and there was no fear. There was just a girl who had done the arithmetic. Mr. Tarbell, she said, I have $42 and nowhere to sleep tonight, and you have a place nobody wants. We can help each other. Or we can both stand here and pretend we don't see what we're seeing. Roy put a hand over his mouth. He stood there a long time. Then he turned around, opened a drawer behind him, and took out a key on a brass tag. He laid it on the counter. He pushed the paperwork across. Sign here, he said. And here. And here, she signed. Her handwriting was small and careful. The hand of a girl who had practiced her signature in a notebook, because some part of her had always known she'd need it one day. He took the 40. He counted it twice and slipped it into the drawer like he wished he could put it right back in her pocket. He pushed the key toward her. There's a back door key, too, he said. I never had it. Nobody did. He stopped. His thumb moved over the brass tag. And there's that room. End of the downstairs hall. Oak door. You'll know it when you see it. It's not like the others. He met her eyes. I never had a key to that one either. Amos saw to that. Leave it be, honey. Whatever's behind it has been behind it a long time. Some doors don't want opening. Wren closed her fist around the key. The brass was warm. Mr. Tarbell, she said. I'd like a box of crackers, a jar of peanut butter, and a box of matches. I've got $2. Roy Tarbell, who had stood behind that counter 41 years and seen 1,000 kinds of trouble walk in the door, took off his glasses. He wiped them on the corner of his apron. He put them back on. I'll take $1. 2. 1 Wren. That's the price. And take that roll of butterscotch from the jar there. I won't have you walking out of here with nothing but crackers. She took the butterscotch. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. The bell jingled when she opened the door. The sun outside was lower now. The shadows of the corn gone long. The radio behind the counter said, thunderstorms definitely. Thunderstorms by 10. And Roy. Tarbell watched the girl walk back out into the heat with everything she owned. And he did not know it. Yet could not have known. But he was going to lie awake that night thinking about a key, and a room nobody had opened in 10 years, and a girl who'd just signed her name to it. The track from the gate to the house was longer than it looked. It wound around an old rock pile, past a fence that had given up sometime during the Eisenhower years, down into a little gully where a creek ran shallow over white pebbles, and then back up again, and only then all at once did the house come into view. Wren stopped, because it didn't look the way she'd pictured it. She'd pictured a shack, a thing falling in on itself, the kind of place you wouldn't put a dog. And it was that partly the roof sagged, The porch tilted, the wisteria had crawled up the south wall and was working at the windows like it meant to swallow the whole thing. Whole. But it was something else, too. It was a real house. A true farmhouse, 2 stories white. Clapboard gone gray with weather. A wide porch wrapping the front and one side. A brick chimney still standing straight. A barn off to the right, with one door hanging on a single hinge. A henhouse to the left. An old orchard down the back slope, the fruit trees gone wild but still in leaf, still. And chickens. Wren counted them before she even set down her sacks. 7. 7 scrawny brown hens scratching in the yard, like they owned the place, which she supposed they did. They'd been here longer than anybody. One of them, a red one gone scruffy at the neck, cocked her head at Wren like a question. "Hi," Wren said. The hen didn't answer. But she didn't run either. The porch boards gave under Wren's weight. Not broken. Just tired the way old wood gets tired when nobody's walked on it. In a long while, the front door wasn't locked. It had swelled in its frame and the latch didn't catch anymore, and when she pushed it, scraped across the floor and opened. The smell that came out was the smell of a house that had been closed up. Wood dust, something like cedar from a closet somewhere. A little mouse. Not bad. The smell of a place that had been sealed but not abandoned in its heart. Sealed up like a wound that's healing. She stepped inside. A stone fireplace. A rag rug bunched in the middle. A horsehair sofa with a quilt folded over the back in the colors of a faded sunset. A rocking chair by the window. An oil lamp on a side table. A pump organ against the far wall with the keys gone yellow. She felt the way you feel walking into a house where somebody has just stepped out. Not died, just left. Set down the coffee cup, said, "I'll be right back," to nobody in particular, and didn't come. She walked it room by room. The dining room, 6 chairs, a lace cloth so old it crumbled where she touched it. The kitchen, a black iron cook stove gone to rust, a sink with a hand pump, cabinet doors hanging open over a few tin plates and a coffee can on the sill with a dried up geranium in it. A back porch with a wash tub on a stand. The 2 bedrooms upstairs, each with an iron bed frame and a thin mattress wanting air. And then coming back down, at the end of the downstairs hall, the door. Wren stopped because she'd walked past it once already without seeing it. And that was the strange part. It was a door. Just a door. Except it wasn't. The other doors in the house were pine-painted white plain, the kind a country carpenter hangs and never thinks of again. This one was oak, thick, unpainted. The kind of door a man puts on a strong room. The kind a man builds himself after the house is already standing because he needs it for something the house was not built for. The hinges were iron black, hand-forged. The knob was iron too. And below the knob, a keyhole, old skeleton key style, worn smooth in the middle where a thumb had pressed against it many, many times. Wren set her hand flat on the wood, and she pulled it back. Because the wood was cold. Cooler than the wall around it, which made no sense. The hall was the warmest part of the house. The late sun came through the back window all afternoon, and the paneling was warm to the touch, and the floor was warm under her feet. But the door was cold. Cold the way a stone is cold when you turn it over and find the underside that never saw the sun. She tried the knob. It didn't turn. She tried it again. Put her shoulder to the wood, and the door didn't so much as creak. It was set in its frame like it had grown there. She stepped back. She thought Roy said there was a room. Roy said, "Leave it be." And she thought, I am 17 years old, and I just bought this whole house for $40, and there is exactly one door in it I cannot open. Of course there is. She turned around, carried her suitcase up to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, the one with the east window. because she wanted to know where the sun would come from in the morning. And then she came back down, and she stood in front of the cold door again. She didn't know why. She just stood there. And she had the faint, foolish feeling, the kind you can't say out loud without sounding crazy, that the door had been waiting for her. She shook it off. She went to make supper. There wasn't much to make. She sat on the porch steps with the crackers and the peanut butter while the light slid down behind the cottonwoods, and she ate slow. She'd learned a long time ago not to eat fast. Fast eaters ate too much. Slow eaters made it last. The chickens came to investigate. She broke a cracker and tossed the pieces into the dust, and they came running and pecked at her feet. And the scruffy red one got bold and stepped right up onto her shoe. Wren smiled. It surprised her. She hadn't smiled in long enough that the muscles in her cheeks felt unfamiliar, like a key turning in a lock that hadn't been used in years. The sun went down, and the Nebraska sky did the thing it does in July. It went orange. It went pink. It went a long, slow purple. And then the first star came out. And then 1,000 more came out behind it. And the whole bowl of the sky lit up like nothing she'd ever seen from Verna's back step, where the street light on the corner drowned everything out. A coyote yipped down by the creek. The corn whispered. A barn owl asked its one soft question, and nothing else. No car, no television, no voice rising up the stairs about something Wren had done or hadn't done or should have known better than to do. It was the loudest nothing she had ever heard. She dragged the mattress off the upstairs bed and out onto the back porch, because it was too hot to sleep up under that roof, and she beat it with a broom until the dust came out in clouds. She put the tin of money under a loose floorboard she'd noticed by the kitchen window, the way her grandmother taught her. She washed her face at the pump, and the water came up cold and clear, and she'd been half afraid it wouldn't. The well had held. The chickens were fed. There was a roof, most of one over her head. She lay down on the mattress on the back porch with her head on a folded sweater, and she stared up at the stars through the screen, and she had the first clear thought she'd had in a long, long time. I am alive, and I am here, and nobody can put me out tonight. She slept. She slept hard, until the sound. It was somewhere around 3 a.m. She didn't have a watch, but the moon was where the moon is at 3 a.m. in July, high up Small Wash Pail. The air had cooled. The corn had gone quiet. And the sound came from inside the house. It was not a creak. Wren had grown up in an old house. She knew creaks. Creaks were friendly. Creaks were the bones of a place turning over in its sleep. This was heavier. It was the sound of something shifting. The sound a chair makes sliding an inch across a wood floor. The sound it made when Verna moved the kitchen table to mop under it. That kind of sound, but muffled like it was coming from behind a wall. Wren opened her eyes. She did not move. She listened. Nothing. Then again, the same sound. From the direction of the downstairs hall. From the direction of the cold oak door. She sat up slow. A mouse, she told herself. A coon in the cellar. An old house. But her heart was going faster than the story she was telling herself could account for. And she did not get up because she did not want to walk down that dark hall to a door she could not open. With nothing in her hand but a box of crackers. She lay back down. She listened until the listening wore her out. The sound did not come again. And after a long time she slept. When she woke, the sun was already over the eastern fence, and the chickens were complaining about something, and Wren Halladay was the owner of a farmstead in the rolling country of Nebraska. And the first morning of the rest of her life had begun. She spent that morning learning the place. That was how she thought of it. Not exploring learning. The way you learn a person. You start on the outside. You move careful. You don't pretend to know what you don't. The barn had a loft, and the loft had 3 bales left in it, dry enough to use, a wheelbarrow with a flat tire, a handsaw, rusted at the teeth, but still a saw, a coil of baling wire, a workbench with a vise. The hen house had 8 nesting boxes, 6 empty too, with eggs gone old. The orchard had 4 apple trees and 2 pear, and a lone cherry the birds had been making free with. There was a vegetable patch behind the hen house gone to weeds, but the soil under the weeds was black and crumbly and rich the way bottom soil gets. She came back inside near 11 with the heat building, and she stood in the kitchen and looked at the cook stove, because the cook stove was where her real work was going to start. The cook stove was how she'd eat, how she'd boil water, how when winter came and winter was coming, no matter how far off it felt, she'd keep from freezing. She lit a fire, matches from Roy, kindling from a basket beside the stove that somebody Amos Whitmore, she supposed, had left full and ready, the way a man leaves a thing he means to come back to. The fire took slow at first, then with a confidence that surprised her. She set a pot of well water on to boil, and while she waited, she got down on her knees with a rag and started cleaning. It was the kind of cleaning you do when you're not really cleaning, when you're using your hands to keep your head still. She wiped the side of the stove, wiped under it, wiped the corner where the stove met the wall behind it, where the metal sat an inch off the paneling so the heat couldn't touch the wood. And in that inch, wedged in brown with old grease and almost the same color as the wool of the rag, a folded piece of paper. Wren stopped. She set the rag down. She reached in and worked the paper free with 2 fingers. It was stiff. It had been there a long time. The grease and the heat had cured it almost like leather. She unfolded it slow and it crackled, and the handwriting on it was small and tight and slanted hard to the right, the hand of somebody taught to write before any war you care to name, the kind of hand that didn't exist on people her own age. She read it. She read it again. Whoever finds this, God, bless you for getting this far. Don't open the room at the end of the hall. Not out of meanness. Some things need time to be understood. When you're ready, the key is where tomorrow always begins. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Wren sat down right there on the kitchen floor, her back against the warm iron of the stove, the pot just starting to murmur its way toward a boil, the letter open in her lap. Where tomorrow always begins. She thought east, because tomorrow began in the east, where the sun came up. She thought, that's the orchard. She thought. But there's nothing in the orchard but trees. And then she thought, not yet. And she did not know why she thought it. But she did. She folded the letter and slid it into the pocket of her shorts. She got up. The water was boiling. She made herself a weak cup of coffee Roy had thrown in a twist of grounds with the crackers, a kindness she hadn't finished registering, and she drank it standing at the window looking out at the orchard. The apple trees stood quiet in the heat. Whatever was in the orchard could wait. Some things you don't run at. Some things you walk toward slow when you're ready. The neighbor came at 2:05 that afternoon. Wren was in the side yard, mending a section of fence with baling wire and a pair of pliers from the barn, and she didn't hear the woman come up the track because the wind had picked up the way it does ahead of a Nebraska thunderstorm, and the cottonwoods were all talking at once. Hello, the house. Wren's head came up. Head. A woman stood at the end of the track just past the gate. 40 maybe. Dark hair pinned back with 2 combs. A pale blue summer dress, sprigged with little white flowers, and a cardigan over it despite the heat. She carried a basket on one arm. Wren set down the pliers. Hi. The woman didn't come any closer. That was the first thing Wren noticed. Country people came up to your porch. Country people knocked on your door. Country people did not stand at the gate and wait to be invited. Not unless they weren't sure who they'd find. I'm Della, the woman said. Down the road. Next place east about a half mile. I saw smoke from the chimney last night and again this morning. Didn't know anybody had bought the Whitmore place. I did. You did. It wasn't a question. It was the woman repeating it back to herself like the words needed a second to fit together in her head. Wren came over to the gate. Up close, Della had kind eyes. Brown, a little tired, but kind in the way of women who have been kind so long they've forgotten how to be anything else. There was a smudge of flour on her cheek she hadn't noticed. I brought you a few things, Della said, holding up the basket. Cornbread, some chicken and dumplings, a jar of peach preserves. I figured if you just moved in, you hadn't had time to lay in much. You didn't have to do that. I know. Thank you. Della looked at her. A second that lasted a beat too long. How old are you, honey? 17. 17. The woman closed her eyes for the briefest moment like the number stung. Like it explained something she'd been afraid was going to need explaining. Then she opened them and she smiled, and the smile was real, but it had a wobble in it. Well, she said, I'll just leave this here at the gate. I don't want to crowd you. You're settling in. You'll have plenty to do without a neighbor underfoot. She set the basket on the gatepost. Mrs. Wren started. Della, did you know him, Mr. Whitmore? And the woman's face did something. It wasn't dramatic. It was just that for half a second the kindness slipped. And underneath the kindness was something else. Grief, maybe, or the memory of grief. The way water under thin ice still moves even after the ice is set. I knew Amos, Della said. Yes. Was he a good man? Della looked at her surprised. Honey, Amos Whitmore was as good a man as ever broke a plow on this stretch of road. Why do you ask? Just wondering. What happened to him? And there it was again, that slip. The woman's gaze went past Wren to the house, to the windows, to the dark behind them. And Wren watched her decide something. Watched her decide not yet. Watched the kindness come back over her face the way a curtain comes back over a window. That's a long story, Della said gently. Not for a first afternoon. You'll come to supper some night when you've got your feet under you. I'll tell you about Amos Whitmore then, if you still want to hear it. All right. Della turned to go, and then she stopped, and she turned back. Honey, she said, what did you say your name was? Wren, said the girl. Wren Halladay. The wind in the cottonwoods kept moving. The chickens kept scratching. The day kept doing what the day was doing. But Della went still. It was a stillness Wren had never seen on a grown woman's face before. The kind of stillness that happens when somebody has just heard a thing they've been waiting half their life to hear and never thought they'd actually hear. The kind of stillness that means the floor has gone out from under a person and they are deciding very fast whether they are going to fall. Halladay, Della said. Yes. From town. From town. Della put a hand on the gatepost. She steadied herself against it. She didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. The wind moved her cardigan. The basket sat there with its checkered cloth turning back at one corner in the breeze. And then Della said very quiet, almost to herself, Lord above. Della, are you all right? The woman drew a breath, held it, let it out, and she looked at Wren. Really looked at her this time, the way a person looks at a photograph they can't quite place. Eyes traveling, the cheekbones, the jaw, the set of the mouth, the curve of the brow, cataloging, confirming, adding up things that did not want to add up. Honey, I have to go. Did I say something? You didn't do anything. Della pressed her palm flat to the gatepost. She took 2 steps back the way she'd come. Then she turned again. Wren. Yes. You'll be all right out here tonight. Alone. Yes. There's nothing. And the woman's voice caught on it. There's nothing in that house that frightens you. And it wasn't a question. It was a question pretending not to be one. Wren thought of the cold door. She thought of the sound at 3 in the morning. She thought of the folded letter in her pocket, and the words where tomorrow always begins. And the way Roy Tarbell had said, "Leave it be, honey." "No," Wren said. "Nothing frightens me." Della Whitmore looked at her one more time, and she nodded. And she walked away up the road without looking back. Wren stood at the gate a long time after she was gone. The thunderstorm Roy's radio had promised was building now. The western sky had gone the color of an old bruise. The wind was lifting leaves off the orchard floor and turning them in slow circles. And somewhere far off, there was that first low growl that doesn't quite commit to being thunder yet. She picked up the basket. She carried it inside. She set it on the kitchen table. She did not open it. She walked down the hall to the cold door, and she put her hand on the wood. Cold, always cold. And she said, not out loud, but in the place where it counted, "Who are you?" Why did my name do that to her? What did Amos Whitmore know about a girl named Halladay? What is on the other side of you? The door didn't answer. Doors don't. But Wren Halladay, 17 years old, with $2 left of 42 and a tin under the floorboards, and a brass key in her pocket, and a stranger's basket on her table. Wren Halladay understood, standing in that hall with the wind rising and the storm coming on, that she had not in fact bought a farm. She had bought a question. And the question had her name on it. Outside, the first heavy drops hit the porch roof, and the cottonwoods bent, and the chickens scattered for the henhouse, and somewhere across the orchard a screen door banged open in the wind. The room behind the cold door stayed quiet. It had waited 10 years. It could wait one more night. The storm broke at 9. It came in the way Nebraska storms come in all at once, the wind first. Then the sky cracking open in wide sheets of light. Then the rain hard and sideways, the kind that doesn't fall so much as get thrown. Wren sat at the kitchen table with the oil lamp lit between her and the basket she still hadn't opened. She listened to the rain come at the windows. She listened to the wisteria slap the south wall. She listened to the chimney pull air down it in a long, low whistle that sounded almost like a voice. Almost. She finally opened the basket, cornbread in cheesecloth still warm against her hand. A small crock of chicken and dumplings, the lid tied down with a strip of cloth. A jar of peach preserves with a perfect wax seal, the label written in a careful, slanted hand. Whitmore, July 1973. Wren stopped. She turned the jar in the lamplight. Whitmore. The same name as the man who'd owned this house. The same name as the woman at the gate had no. The woman at the gate had said, Della. Just Della. She hadn't given a last name at all. And Wren had not thought to ask, because out here you didn't nod on the first day. But the jar said Whitmore, and tucked at the very bottom of the basket under the cornbread in the crock was a small thing wrapped in a square of red cloth. Wren lifted it out, unfolded it. A child's drawing. Pencil. A horse done by a young hand, the legs too long, the mane carefully shaded. And in the corner, in a schoolgirl's looping script, a name and a year that the lamplight caught, and Wren read once, and then read again with her heart going strange in her chest. She set the drawing down on the table. She did not yet understand what it meant. But she understood that it meant something. She understood that the woman called Della had walked half a mile in a coming thunderstorm, not to bring cornbread. She had walked half a mile in the wind to leave a child's drawing of a horse at the gate of a girl whose name had turned her white. Wren turned the lamp down low. The thunder rolled down the long bowl of the valley and out across the corn. A tree came down with a crack like a rifle shot, and the rain kept on. She moved her mattress off the back porch and into the front room near the cold hearth, and she slept in fits. Each time the thunder broke close, she opened her eyes and looked down the hall at the dark mouth of it, at where she knew the door was. She thought she heard it again around 4. The shifting, the slide. But the wind was loud and the house was old, and she could not be sure. When she woke, the storm had passed. The world outside was dripping. The cottonwoods were bent. One of the apple trees had lost a limb, and she could see it from the front window. A green branch lying in the wet grass like an arm. The chickens were already out picking through what the storm had brought up from the ground. Wren put on her shoes. She walked outside. The air after a Nebraska storm is the cleanest air there is. She stood on the porch and breathed it. Wet earth, wet wood, wet leaves, something honey-sweet from the wisteria, woken up by the rain. And the cool of it after the heat of the day before the cool that wouldn't last, but was for one morning a gift. And then her feet took her into the orchard. She wasn't planning it. She just walked. Where tomorrow always begins. The east-facing side. The 4 apple trees in their rough row. The grass between them long and wet, soaking her ankles inside 2 steps. The 3rd tree was the biggest. Its trunk was thicker than the others. An older tree, twice as old as Wren, maybe 3 times. The roots had come up out of the soil over the years and lay on the surface now like long, crooked fingers. And between 2 of them, half buried, a stone. Wren stopped breathing, because the stone was wrong. The orchard floor was good black dirt, with the occasional gray rock the size of an egg. The kind a glacier had dropped here 10,000 years ago, and forgotten. This stone was bigger, smoother. One face of it had been worn flat by hand. Somebody had set it there on purpose to mark something. She knelt in the wet grass. She set both hands on the stone, and it was heavier than it looked. And she had to rock it and lift and rock it again until it came up out of the soil with a wet, sucking sound. And underneath a shallow hole, and in the hole a packet wrapped in oilcloth tied with twine. Wren lifted it out and set it on her lap. The twine was wet. The oilcloth was cracked along the folds, but it held. She untied the knot. She unfolded the cloth slow, careful. And inside was a box. A small wooden box, the kind a man makes at a workbench. The lid fitted tight. The corners dovetailed by hand. She worked the lid up. The box was empty. Wren sat there a moment, the empty box in her hands, the rain still steaming off the grass around her. A robin landing on the branch above her head, cocking its eye, flying off. Empty. And then she saw, caught in the corner of the box, half pinned under a splinter of the lid, a scrap of stiff paper. Torn. The clean, straight edge of a tear, not the soft fray of age. She worked it loose. It was the corner of a photograph gone soft and brown, and on it was the half of a face. a woman's face, young, hair down loose. Laughing, you could see half a laughing mouth, half a pair of eyes crinkled at the corner. Wren stared at it, and the floor of her stomach went out from under her the way it had gone out from under Della Whitmore at the gate the day before, because the half a face on the half a photograph was a face she knew. It was her own, not similar, not a family resemblance the way cousins favor each other across a kitchen table. The same brow, the same crinkle, the same half a mouth she saw in the warped little mirror over the kitchen pump every morning. Somebody sometime had stood in a yard and laughed at a camera with Wren's exact face years before Wren was born. And somebody sometime since had torn that photograph in half and buried the box, and taken the other half away, and kept it. Wren turned the scrap over. On the back, in that same slanted hard right hand from the letter behind the stove, there was writing. But the tear had taken most of it. All that was left was 3 letters and the start of a 4th, and the tail end of a year. CL 56, CL, and 56. Wren Halladay had been born in the spring of 1957. She knelt in the wet orchard with the empty box in one hand, and half a stranger's face, her own face, in the other. And she did not move for a long time. Then she wrapped the scrap back in the oilcloth, and she put it in her pocket, the same pocket that held the letter from behind the stove. The pocket that had become in 2 short days the place where her whole unraveling life was kept. And she walked back to the house. Slow. Slower than she needed to, because the box had been empty. Somebody had said the key was where tomorrow always begins. Somebody had buried a box in the orchard, and the box was empty, which meant one of 2 things. Either Amos Whitmore had taken the key out himself before he died and hidden it somewhere else, or somebody had been here before her. Somebody had dug up this stone in this orchard on this farm that nobody had wanted for 10 years and taken the key out of the box and set the stone back down and gone away. Somebody who had a reason to want into the room at the end of the hall. That night, the wind died and the heat came back, and Wren lay on her mattress in the front room with the windows open and the chickens settled and the moon climbing up over the cottonwoods. And she could not sleep. She lay there and she watched the dark mouth of the hallway. And somewhere between midnight and the long, flat hours after, with her eyes half closed and the moon laying a pale square across the floorboards, she saw it. A line of light, thin, faint, the color of an oil flame, not the cold blue-white of the moon. It came up from under the cold oak door at the end of the hall, a thin gold seam along the bottom of the wood, and it flickered the way a lamp flickers when somebody behind a closed door moves past it in the dark. Wren did not breathe. The light steadied. Then it moved. Then, soft as the turning of a page, soft as a chair, sliding 1 inch across an old wood floor, it went out. And the house was dark again, and the moon laid its pale square across the floor. And 7 hens slept in the henhouse, and a girl lay rigid on a mattress with her own laughing face folded in her pocket and her grandfather's locked door at the end of the hall. She had bought a question. She knew that now. What she did not know yet, what she would not know until she found the real key and turned it, and pushed that cold oak door open into the dark, was that the question had been waiting on the other side of it. And the question was alive. Wren did not sleep again that night. She lay on the mattress in the front room with her eyes open and her back to the wall. And she watched the seam under the cold door, the way a man watches a snake he has lost track of in tall grass. The thin gold light did not come back. But knowing it had been there changed the house. The dark of the hallway was no longer just dark. It was occupied dark. It had a weight to it now, the weight of something on the far side of a wall that knew you were there. When the sun finally came up over the eastern fence, Wren got up and her body ached, the way it aches when you have spent a whole night being afraid. She splashed water on her face at the pump. She fed the chickens. She did all the small, ordinary things, and the small, ordinary things steadied her the way they always did. And then she went looking for the key, because the box in the orchard had been empty, and a person could lie awake forever, waiting for a light to come back. But a person could not turn a lock without a key. And Wren Halladay had decided somewhere, in the long, flat hours of that night, that she would rather know than be afraid. Knowing she had learned a long time ago was the only floor a person could stand on. Fear had no floor at all. When you're ready, the key is where tomorrow always begins. She'd thought that meant the orchard, the east, the sunrise, and the orchard had given her a torn face and an empty box and nothing else, so she had read it wrong. And this thought came to her over the weak coffee the way the true thoughts always came sideways while she was looking at something else. Or she had read it too plain, where tomorrow always begins. Not the sunrise, not the east. Something else. Something a man like Amos Whitmore, who wrote in a hand from before the wars and built his own oak door and buried things under stones, would have meant by it. She thought about that all morning while her hands did other work. And it was while she was standing in the small east bedroom, the one she'd taken for her own, looking out the window at the orchard where the buried box had given up its empty secret. It was there that her eye fell on the thing she'd walked past a dozen times. A Bible. It sat on the shelf at the head of the bed. Brown leather, gold-edged pages, the spine cracked white from a lifetime of being opened. Wren had not touched it. You did not touch another family's Bible, not even a dead family's. Not without a reason. But now she had a reason. And the reason was a sentence that had been turning over in her head since the orchard. She took it down. It was heavy. She set it on the quilt and let it fall open the way an old Bible falls open to the place its spine has learned. And it fell open to the front, to the family pages. The ones where people wrote the births and the deaths and the marriages in ink across the generations. And there, in the slanted, hard right hand, she now knew like she knew her own face, Whitmore. Amos Garrett Whitmore, born 1908. Married Iris Lund, 1929. Died 1949. And below that one line, one only, Cleo Iris Whitmore, born 1939. Cleo. CL. The two letters on the torn photograph. CL Cleo. And the year on the back of the photo had been 56 Cleo. 56, a year before Wren was born. Wren sat very still on the bed, with the Bible open across her knees, and then she remembered the sentence, where tomorrow always begins. And she looked down at the open Bible, and she understood all at once the way you understand a thing that has been in front of you the whole time. Because there is one place, one single place in all the world, where tomorrow always begins. Where a man who reads his Bible by lamplight every night of his life would know that tomorrow always, always begins. She turned the gold-edged pages fast. Now her hands not quite steady past the begats, and the kings and the long, sorrowing prophets all the way to the back. To the very last book, to the very last chapter, to the very last page. To the place every Bible ends. To the place where the new day, the day after all the days, the tomorrow that has no evening always begins. And there, pressed flat between the last page and the back cover, where a man could put a thing and trust that no thief and no fool and no idle hand would ever find it. Because no thief and no fool and no idle hand ever reads that far, was a key. Iron. Black with age, but not rusted through. Skeleton key style, the bow at the top. A simple loop, the bit at the bottom shaped to fit one lock and no other. The kind of key that was not made in a factory. The kind a man makes at a forge for a man with a particular door. Wren picked it up off the page. It was cold. Cold the way the door was cold. She held it in the flat of her palm, and she looked at it and she thought I could put it back. I could close this Bible and put it on the shelf and sleep in the barn tonight, and walk to town in the morning and tell Roy Tarbell I changed my mind. And she thought, no, I couldn't. She had never once in her life been able to put a question down. It was the thing about her that Verna had hated most. Why little Wren had always asked. Why until Verna's hand came down, and the hand had never once made the why go away. It had only taught Wren to ask it silently on the inside where it grew. She closed the Bible. She set it back on the shelf exactly where it had been. And she carried the key down the stairs and down the hall to the cold oak door. She slid it into the lock. It fit. Of course it fit. She turned it. The mechanism resisted 10 years of stillness inside it, and she had to push, and then she had to throw her shoulder into it, and then click. The sound was small, but it filled the hall. It filled the house. It filled the whole bright morning. Wren stood with her hand on the cold iron knob, and she thought of Roy Tarbell saying, "Leave it be, honey." And she thought of Della Whitmore going white at the gate. And she thought of a thin gold light flickering under this door at 3 in the morning. And she turned the knob, and she pushed. The door opened. Not fast, slow. The hinges groaned the way old iron groans when it has held one position for 10 years. And the smell came out. It was not the smell of rot. It was not the smell of mouse, or mold, or death. It was the smell of something kept. Cedar, dried lavender, paper. The smell of a thing somebody had sealed up so that it would last. The smell of a room that had been loved and then closed like a hand closing gently over something fragile. And underneath that smell, fainter but unmistakable, to a girl who had grown up in a poor house and knew it the way she knew her own breath. The smell of lamp oil. Recent lamp oil. The smell of a wick that has burned and been turned out, and not so very long ago. Wren stepped inside. It was a girl's room. That was the first thing, and it stopped her in the doorway like a hand on her chest. A narrow bed against one wall. An iron frame, a quilt folded perfectly across the foot of it, in patches of green and gold and faded red. A small desk by the window, the curtain drawn, not nailed, not boarded. Just drawn the way you draw a curtain when you mean to come back and open it again. A chair tucked under the desk. A bookshelf. A braided rug, its colors gone soft. And on every wall, the small archaeology of a young life photographs. In frames, a pressed wildflower under glass. A blue ribbon from a county fair. A school certificate. A pencil drawing of a horse signed in the corner in the same looping schoolgirl hand Wren had seen on the peach preserve jar. And the family page of the Bible. It was somebody's daughter's room. It was Cleo's room. And it had been kept. Dusted. The quilt squared. The curtain drawn against the sun so the paper of the photographs would not yellow. For 10 years in a house nobody had set foot in. Somebody had been keeping this one room the way you keep a grave you cannot stop visiting. But that was not what stopped Wren's breath a second time. What stopped her breath was the lamp. It sat on the desk. An oil lamp, the chimney sooted at the top from use, and the lamp was warm. She crossed the room and laid 2 fingers against the brass base, and it was warm, not hot, not freshly burning, but warm. the way iron is warm hours after the fire's been turned out. Somebody had burned this lamp. Last night, somebody had sat in this room, in this kept room behind this locked door last night while Wren lay rigid on a mattress 15 feet away, watching the seam of gold light under the wood, and the door had been locked from the outside. With a key hidden in the back of a Bible, Wren stood in the middle of the room with her own heart loud in her ears, and she turned slow, and she looked at the walls, and she looked at the bed, and she looked at the floor, the braided rug, the boards around it, and she saw in the far corner where the rug ended and the wall met the floor a seam, not a crack, a seam, a line in the floorboards too straight to be the work of time, a square cut into the floor the size a man could fit through, a trapdoor fitted so close, so carefully, that with the rug pulled over half of it, you would never, ever see it. Wren knelt. She pulled the rug back. There was an iron ring set flush into the wood, dropped into a routed groove, so it would lie flat. She hooked 2 fingers under it and lifted, and the ring came up and the trapdoor came up after it, swinging on hinges oiled so well. They made no sound at all. And out of the square black hole in the floor came the smell stronger now. Lamp oil and cool earth, and underneath it, the close animal smell of a place where something living had been sleeping for a long, long time. A wooden ladder went down into the dark. Wren knelt at the edge of the hole, her hands flat on the cold floor, and she looked down into the black. And the black looked back up at her, and from somewhere, down there, somewhere below her in the earth, under the kept room, she heard it. The shifting, the slide, the sound a chair makes moving an inch across a floor, the sound she had heard at 3 in the morning on her first night in this house, and then, low cracked, dry as a husk, the voice of something that had not used words in a very long time, a voice that came up out of the dark and turned the blood in Wren's body to cold water. Cleo. She did not run. Later, she would not be able to say why. Every animal nerve in her body told her to run, to slam the trapdoor and lock the oak door, and run down the track and not stop until she reached Roy Tarbell's counter. But she did not run, because under the fear, deeper than the fear, was the why that had grown in her all her life, in the silent place where Verna's hand could not reach it. And the why wanted to know whose voice that was, and why it had said that name, and what it was doing in the dark under her grandfather's house. "No," Wren said, and her own voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "No, I'm not Cleo." Silence from the dark. A long, long silence. And then the slide again, the shifting and the scrape of the ladder taking weight, and a sound that was almost a sob, and almost a word, and was neither. Wren stood up and stepped back from the hole, and she waited. And after a long time, a hand came up out of the dark and closed over the top rung of the ladder. It was an old man's hand. The knuckles swollen, the nails long and yellow, the skin gone the gray-white of something that has not seen the sun in years. And then a head white hair, grown wild and long, a beard down to the chest matted, and a face so thin the bone showed through it, the eyes huge and pale, and blinking against the morning light coming in from the hall, the eyes of a creature that has lived in the dark so long. That day has become a kind of pain. Wren put her hand over her mouth. The old man came up out of the floor, one slow rung at a time, and he stood in the kept room, swaying one hand on the desk for balance. And he looked at her with those huge, pale, blinking eyes, and he said in that cracked, dry husk of a voice, "You came back." "I'm not..." Wren's voice broke. She made herself steady it. "I'm not Cleo. My name is Wren. I bought this house. I bought it 3 days ago." The old man's face worked. Something moved behind the pale eyes, slow like a man trying to lift a great weight he had set down long ago and forgotten how to hold. "Cleo," he said again, but softer now, less certain. "Cleo's face. You've got Cleo's face." "Who are you?" Wren said, and the old man looked at her and looked at the room around him. The kept room, the squared quilt, the drawn curtain, the bookshelf with its Little Women and its county fair ribbon. And something came back into his ruined face. Not all of it, not nearly all of it, but a corner of a man returning to himself after a long way gone. "Amos," he said. "I'm Amos. This is my house." He looked down at his own gray, ruined hands, as if he had never seen them. "This is my house. And that," he turned slow toward the bed, toward the quilt. "That's my Cleo's bed. And she's..." The pale eyes filled. "She's coming back. She's coming back. I have to keep it ready for when she comes back." Wren Halladay stood in the doorway of a dead girl's room with the morning sun behind her, and an old man risen up out of the floor in front of her. An old man the whole county believed had been dead for 10 years. And the pieces, the cold door, the kept room, the empty box, the torn photograph, the woman at the gate gone white at the sound of a name the pieces did not yet fit. But she understood that they would. She understood that she was standing inside the answer to the question she had bought for $40. And she understood, looking at the wreck of the old man and the tears standing in his ruined eyes, that the answer was gonna break her heart. "Amos," she said, gently, the way you speak to a frightened animal. "Amos, when did Cleo go away?" And the old man looked at her, and the corner of him that had come back began very slowly to go away again. "She'll come back," he said. "She always comes back. I keep the room ready." He shuffled toward the bed, and he sat down on the edge of it, and he put one gray hand flat on the squared quilt, and he stroked it, the way a man strokes a thing he loves. "I keep the room." Wren did not go to town that day, though everything in her wanted to. She did not run to Roy Tarbell, did not run to Della Whitmore, because the old man on the bed could not be left. He was weak, so weak she did not understand how he was alive at all. And he was lost somewhere down a long, dark road inside his own head. And to leave him would have been to leave a child alone at the top of a flight of stairs. She had been left like that once. She would not do it to another living soul. So she stayed. She found in the corner of the cellar, at the bottom of the ladder, the answer to how he had lived. A cot with blankets gone foul. A bucket. Rows of mason jars on a shelf. Peaches, beans, tomatoes, the same careful, slanted labels as the jar in the basket. Whitmore. And dates. The dates went back years, but the newest ones were fresh. This year's. Whitmore, June 1974. Somebody had been bringing him food. Somebody had been keeping the old man alive in the dark year after year in secret, behind a locked door, and Wren knew the way she now knew most things in this house sideways, while looking at something else exactly who. She brought the old man up into the light a little at a time. She got him to the kitchen. She heated the chicken and dumplings from the basket on the cook stove, and she fed him from a spoon slow, the way you feed someone who has half forgotten how, and he ate, and a little color came into the gray of his face. She drew water and washed his hands and his face with a cloth. She did not ask him any more questions because the questions frightened him, sent him scuttling back down the dark road in his head toward the cellar and the kept room. She just kept him fed and warm and clean, the small, ordinary things, the only floor she had ever been able to stand on. And around the middle of the afternoon, with the old man asleep in the rocking chair by the window, with a quilt over his knees, the track gave its long crunch of gravel. And Wren looked up, and Della Whitmore was coming up to the house on foot. Fast, not running. Della was not a woman who ran, but walking with the kind of purpose that was the closest a woman her age came to it. And she had a basket on her arm, and her face was set, and she did not stop at the gate this time. She came all the way up to the porch, and she climbed the steps, and she came through the front door without knocking, the way a person comes into a house they know. And she saw the old man asleep in the rocker by the window, and she stopped dead, and the basket slipped from her arm and hit the floor, and the jars inside it broke. And Della Whitmore put both hands over her mouth and made a sound like the bottom dropping out of the world. "You found him," she said. Oh God, you found him." "You've been feeding him," Wren said. It was not a question. "The jar's in the cellar. You've been keeping him alive down there. For 10 years. Della sank down onto the horsehair sofa. Slow, her legs gone out from under her, and she looked at the sleeping old man, and the tears ran down her face, and she did not wipe them. "Sit down, honey," she said. "Sit down, I'll tell you. I'll tell you all of it. God forgive me, I should have told you the first day, the minute I heard your name at that gate. But I was so afraid. Sit down. You're owed the whole of it now." And Wren sat down on the rug at the old man's feet, and she folded her hands in her lap, and Della Whitmore began to talk. "My name is Della Whitmore," she said. "Amos was my brother." Wren went still, older than me by 14 years. Near enough my father after our own father passed. He had this place and his wife Iris and his girl, his Cleo. Della looked at the sleeping man. "And I had the place down the road with my husband till the cancer took him in 68. And after that, just me. So She stopped. She looked at Wren, and her face did the thing it had done at the gate. The slip, the grief moving under the ice. "I'm your great-aunt Honey. I'm your blood. That's what the name did to me out at that gate. Halladay. I knew it the second you said it. I'd been waiting 17 years to have my heart broke by that name. And there you stood at my brother's gate with my brother's granddaughter's face, saying it out loud in the sun." Wren did not move. She could not. The room had gone very far away and very close all at once. "Tell me," she said. "From the start. Tell me all of it." Della folded her hands. "Cleo grew up here," she said, "on this farm. Her mother died when she was 10. The diphtheria winter, and after that, it was just Amos and the girl, the two of them working this place. And he loved her. Lord, he loved that girl, past all sense. She was the prettiest thing in the county, and she didn't know it, which was the prettiest thing about her. She could pitch a ball over the schoolhouse fence. She sang the alto line in church, and the alto's harder than the soprano, and she made it sound like nothing. Della's voice went soft, and there was a boy, 4 miles down the same gravel road. They grew up together, those two, same one-room school, same class, the class of 57. And by the time they were 16, there wasn't a soul on this road who didn't know Cleo Whitmore and that boy were going to be married. It was just a matter of time. His name. And here Della looked at Wren, and something passed over her face, careful like a person setting a fragile thing down on a hard table. His name was Eli. Wren's hands closed in her lap. "Eli," she said. "Eli Halladay." The name went through Wren like cold water down the spine. "My father," she whispered. "Your father." Della closed her eyes a moment. In the spring of 56, Eli came to this house and asked Amos for Cleo's hand. And Amos said yes and gave them his blessing. And they were to be married that fall and live here, and have their children here the way it was meant to go. And then Della opened her eyes. Then Cleo came up expecting. And that was no shame, not out here, not with 2 good kids already promised. It just moved the wedding up. They were planning a quiet summer wedding. Della stopped. And then there was Verna. The name hung in the room like smoke. Verna's people had the lumberyard in town, Della said. Town money. Not big money, but the kind of money that gets you a new dress every season and a clean car every 5 years. The kind of money that made you somebody out here in those days. And Verna had wanted Eli Halladay since they were children. Wanted him. Waited on him. And when she heard he'd gone, and promised himself to a farm girl out on the gravel well, Verna's mother was not a woman who took kindly to losing. Wren sat very still. What did she do? She said. She drove out to the Halladay place one Sunday, Della said, when Eli's folks were at church and Eli was alone mending fence in the lower pasture. And she sat in her car at the end of the lane, and she waited for him to come up. And when he came up, she rolled the window down, and she told him a great many things. She told him he'd be poor all his life, married to a farm girl on 60 rough acres. She told him his children would be poor. She told him Cleo was a sweet girl, but a sweet girl wasn't a future. And she told him that Verna's father would set him up a house front money, a real start, a place in town. The moon in a car handed to a 21-year-old boy who'd never owned a suit that fit nor set foot in a bank to ask for anything. Della's voice went hard and flat. And he took it. The old man stirred in the rocker. Della glanced at him, lowered her voice. He took it, honey. He told Cleo in July. He married Verna in October, the same October he was to have married your mother, in the same little courthouse, in the same county. I don't believe any one thing in this whole sorry story was crueler than that. The same month. And Cleo, Wren said, she was carrying you. Della reached out and put a hand on Wren's knee, gentle. She had you right here in this house in February of '57. Amos delivered you himself. The doctor couldn't get out. The roads were ice, and Amos had midwifed his own cows for 30 years, and his hands knew what to do. And you came out screaming, and Cleo held you, and she named you. Right out. Wren. Della's eyes filled. After the little brown bird that sings louder than any bird twice its size. She said you'd come into a hard world small, and you'd have to sing loud. And so she named you for the loudest small thing she knew. Wren put the heels of her hands against her eyes. She did not cry. The empty thing in her chest, the thing that had stood in the middle of a gravel road 3 days ago and watched a suitcase land in the dust without a tear. That thing was very full now, so full it hummed. But it did not yet cry. She kept me, Wren said. For 2 years, said Della. She kept you, and she worked at the diner in town, and she brought you in a basket and set you behind the counter while she waitressed. But this is a small town, honey. And in a small town in 1957, a girl couldn't be what your mother was without the whole county knowing it. And the whole county did know. And every Sunday morning she sat in the back pew of the Methodist church with you in her arms, and 4 rows up sat Eli and Verna with their heads bent over the same hymnal, and they would not look at her, and she would not look at them. And it ate her, honey. It ate her like a thing eats a thing from the inside. And then, Wren said, and then one morning in February of '59, when you were just turned 2, your mother put on her good dress and packed you up warm and drove Amos's pickup into town. And she carried you up onto Eli and Verna's front porch the porch of the house Verna's daddy bought them, and she set you down on the doormat with a note pinned to your coat. And she rang the bell. And she got back in the truck. And she drove away. The kitchen was very quiet. The old man slept. Outside, a hen complained about something, and far off a tractor worked the rim of the world. "What did the note say?" Wren said. "I never read it, but I think it said you chose your family there. This is your family. Let her have one." "Where did she go?" "Chicago in the end. Amos heard from her a few times letters. She got work cooking in a diner. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she didn't know how to come back. She wrote," Della's voice cracked. "She wrote that some nights she dreamed she was carrying you and woke up reaching across the bed for you and didn't know where she was." Wren took her hands from her face. "My father," she said. "Eli. He died when I was 4. He did. Did Cleo know?" "I don't know, honey. Truly. I don't think Amos ever told her. I think Amos was afraid that if she knew Eli was dead, she'd come back to take you. And Verna had legal claim to you by then. Eli put you on his and Verna's papers when you were weeks old to stop the talk. I think Amos was afraid that her coming back would just be one more way for her to be broken. So she may not know. To this day. She may not know that Eli is dead, nor that you're grown, nor that you're here." Wren looked at the sleeping old man, at the wreck of him, at the long white beard and the gray ruined hands. "And him," she said. "What happened to him? Why was he down in the ground, under his own house?" And Della Whitmore looked at her brother, and the last and worst of it came out of her slow, like something being drawn out of a wound. "He held on for years," she said, "after Cleo left. He kept that room the way you found it. He believed she'd walk back through that door someday. And he wanted her things to be exactly where she left them. He wanted her to know nothing had been touched. He wanted her to know she could come home." Della wiped her face, but a man can't grieve forever standing up. And there wasn't anybody to hold him up. His wife was dead. His daughter gone, his only grandbaby raised by the very people who'd broken his girl's heart. And he couldn't go near you. Verna saw to that, so he had nobody. And the grief honey had got into him like rot gets into a beam. It hollowed him out. He stopped going to town. He stopped speaking to folks. He'd drive past the schoolyard sometimes. The postman told me park across the street when school let out. And just sit there watching the girls come out looking for the one with Cleo's face. Della's voice broke clean in half. "He was looking for you, honey. He was looking for you all those years, and he never knew which one you were. And he never had the right to ask. And he never came up." Wren made a sound. A small one. Not a sob. A step short of a sob. "And 10 years ago, Della said his mind started to go. The grief turned into something else. He got it into his head that Cleo was coming back any day that she was on her way, and that he had to be ready and the room had to be ready, and he couldn't leave the house for fear of missing her. And then he got it into his head that the world outside was dangerous, that people meant to take the room from him, take the house, take Cleo's bed. And one winter he sealed himself in. He built that oak door. He was always a fine hand with wood, and he hid the key, and he made himself a place down in the cellar where he felt safe. And he came up only into the room, only into Cleo's room to keep it dusted, to keep it ready in the dark with the curtain drawn. And the county, Della spread her hands. The county decided he'd died or wandered off or some such. Roy Tarbell came out and knocked and got no answer. And the house looked dead, and the chickens had gone wild. And after a while, the talk just settled into fact the way talk does. Amos Whitmore died 10 years back. Everybody said it. Everybody believed it. The county put the place in trust. But you knew, Wren said. I knew. Della looked at her, and the shame and the love in her face were the same thing, indivisible. I found him that first winter. I came over with a pie. And I heard him moving in the cellar. And I went down. And there he was. My own brother living in the ground like an animal. And out of his head. And he wouldn't come out, honey. He would not come out. I tried. God knows I tried. He'd scream and claw and crawl back down the ladder, and I was afraid if I forced him. If I brought the doctor, they'd take him to the county home, the place they take old men whose minds are gone, and he'd die there in a week in a strange bed with strangers, and Cleo would never. She stopped. So I made a terrible bargain with myself. I let him stay. I kept him fed. I came twice a week with jars year after year, and I let the world go on believing he was dead, because the world believing it was the only thing keeping them from coming to take him. And I told myself it was kindness. And maybe half of it was. And maybe half of it was the most wicked thing I ever did. I have not slept a whole night in 10 years, honey. And I will not say I didn't earn that. The two of them sat in the quiet. The old man slept on. The afternoon light came slanting in gold across the floor and lit the dust in the air. You shouldn't have to carry that alone, Wren said. Not anymore. And Della Whitmore looked at the 17-year-old girl sitting on the rug at her brother's feet. The girl who had been thrown out over a clean plate 3 days ago and had bought a question for $40, and her face broke open all the way. Oh, honeyta, she said. Oh, you've got her whole heart. You've got Cleo's whole heart right there in you. They did not have long to sit in it, because 2 days later, 2 days in which Wren coaxed the old man up into the sun a little more each morning, and washed him and fed him and watched the corner of him that knew his own name grow a hair's breadth wider each day. 2 days later, the gravel gave its long crunch again, and it was not Della. It was a long, dark car Wren did not know, and behind it a second car with a star on the door, and out of the first car got a man in a town suit, soft-handed, smiling with a leather case under his arm, and out of the second got the county sheriff, a heavy, slow man named Pickett, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The man in the suit came up to the porch, and he did not climb the steps, and he smiled the smile of a man who has already won and is only here to be gracious about it. Miss Halladay, he said. Tobias Crane. I represent the estate. I'm afraid there's been a complication with your purchase. Wren stood in the doorway. Behind her in the front room, the old man dozed in the rocker, hidden from view. She did not move from the doorway. What complication? She said. Crane opened the leather case and drew out a sheaf of papers, and he held them up almost lazily. The way a man holds up cards he knows will win. It appears, he said, that Amos Whitmore did leave an heir after all. A nephew. Filed his claim with the county last week, and I'm afraid the nephew's claim predates and supersedes any trustee sale. Your $40, the smile widened, will of course be refunded, but this property reverts to the estate. You'll need to vacate by the end of the month. Wren looked at the papers. She could not read them from where she stood, but she did not need to. She had spent her whole life learning to read faces instead of papers, because faces were the only documents Verna ever let her see. And the face of Tobias Crane was the face of a man telling a lie. He had paid good money to make look like the truth. A nephew. Filed last week, the same week Wren understood it the way she understood everything in this house. Sideways all at once, the same week she had bought the place. The same week smoke had started rising from a chimney that had been cold for 10 years. Somebody had been watching this farm. Somebody had been waiting for it. And the day a girl with $40 had finally put her name on the trustee's paper, somebody had moved, and she thought of the box in the orchard, the empty box. Somebody had dug up the stone and taken the real key before she ever arrived. Somebody who wanted into the room. Somebody who knew there was a room. "There's no nephew," Wren said quietly. Crane's smile flickered just once like a lamp wick in a draft. "I beg your pardon. Amos Whitmore had a wife who died and a daughter who left and a sister." Wren took one step out onto the porch into the sun, and she did not raise her voice, because the empty thing in her chest had taught her long ago that the quiet ones are the ones people are afraid of. "There's no nephew, Mr. Crane. And I think you know there's no nephew. I think somebody paid you to make a nephew out of paper, because somebody wants this house. And I'd dearly love to know why a house nobody wanted for 10 years is suddenly worth all this trouble the very week a girl moved into it." Sheriff Pickett by the car shifted his weight and looked at his boots. Tobias Crane's smile was entirely gone now. "You're a child," he said, and the gracious had drained out of his voice and left something colder underneath. "You're a 17-year-old girl squatting in a condemned house with no power and no kin and no claim. You can sign the papers and take your $40 or the sheriff can remove you, and you can take nothing. Those are the kindnesses on offer." And from the dim front room behind Wren, from the rocker by the window, a voice came, cracked dry, but rising up out of the long dark road inside an old man's ruined head, towards something that for one terrible bright instant was almost clear. "That's the lawyer. That's the lawyer that came before. That's the one she sent. That's Verna's lawyer." Tobias Crane went white, and Wren Halladay turned and looked at the old man in the rocker. And then she turned back and looked at the lawyer who had gone white, and the last lock in the whole house, the one she had not even known was there, turned over in the dark with a click. She felt in her teeth. "Verna," she said, and outside the wind came up across the corn, and the cottonwoods bent, and somewhere down by the creek, a screen door she had not fixed yet, banged open and shut like a thing that could not make up its mind whether to stay or to run. The name hung in the air on the porch, like the last note of a struck bell. Verna. Tobias Crane stood at the bottom of the steps with his leather case and his sheaf of papers, and the white had come up under his town tan, and he was no longer smiling, and for one long moment, nobody on that porch moved at all. It was Sheriff Pickett who broke it. He pushed himself off the side of the car where he'd been leaning, and he took off his hat, and he turned it slow in his big, slow hands, and he looked at the lawyer, and he looked at the girl, and he looked past the girl into the dim front room where an old man sat in a rocker, who by every account Pickett had ever heard had been 10 years dead. "Mr. Crane," the sheriff said. "Who's that in the chair?" Crane did not answer. "Mr. Crane," Pickett said again, and there was a new weight in it. Now the weight of a slow man arriving late, but certain at a thing he should have seen sooner. "You told me this house was empty. You told me there was a squatter and an estate matter, and I was to come stand by while you served papers. You did not tell me there was an old man in the front room. So I'm going to ask you one time, who is that?" And Wren Halladay stepped back from the doorway, and she opened it wide so that the slant of afternoon sun fell across the floor and onto the rocker and onto the wreck of the man who sat in it. The long white beard and the gray ruined hands and the huge pale blinking eyes. "That," Wren said, "is Amos Whitmore, the man this whole county buried 10 years ago without ever once putting him in the ground." She kept her voice quiet. The quiet was a thing she had, the one inheritance Verna's house had given her without meaning to. And he just told you he knows your lawyer, Sheriff. He just told you whose lawyer he is. Pickett looked at Crane for a long, slow moment. Crane found his voice. The man is plainly out of his mind. Senile. You take the word of a lunatic who's been living in a cellar over a member of the bar. I'd take the word of an old man who went white at the sight of you, the sheriff said, about as fast as I just watched you go white at the sound of a name. Put your papers away, Mr. Crane. We're done serving anything today. And that was the first crack in it. Wren saw it. She had spent 13 years learning to read the exact moment a thing began to come apart. Because in Verna's house, knowing that moment was how you survived it. And she saw it now in the way Tobias Crane's hand tightened on his leather case, in the way his eyes went just once to the long, dark car, as if measuring the distance to it. But Wren also knew it the way she knew most things in this house. Sideways all at once, that one slow, honest sheriff and one frightened lawyer did not make a thing safe. Crane would drive back to town. Crane would make a telephone call. And on the other end of that telephone call, in a house with a clean car in the drive and a clean plate in every cupboard, was the woman who had built her whole life on the back of a lie, and who had just learned through her own lawyer that the lie was no longer buried. Sheriff, Wren said, I'd be obliged if you'd stay long enough to see that man get back in his car and drive off. And I'd be more obliged still if you'd carry a message to town for me. Name it, miss. Tell Roy Tarbell at the store that Wren Halladay needs to use his telephone. Tonight, if he'll have me. She looked at the old man in the rocker who had drifted back down the long, dark road inside himself and was stroking the arm of the chair as if it were a quilt. And tell my great-aunt Della Whitmore to come up to the house. There's been a development. And I'm done letting her carry it by herself. Crane drove off. Pickett followed him as far as the gate and then sat in his car at the gate for a while, watching the dust settle, a slow man turning a new and unwelcome shape over in his mind. And then he too drove off toward town with a message in his head and a fact in his gut that he could not unlearn. Della came up the track at a dead walk that for her was a run, and when Wren told her about Crane, about the nephew, that was not a nephew, about the old man rising up out of the rocker to name Verna's lawyer, Della sat down hard on the porch step and put her face in her hands. She knows that, Della said into her hands. After all these years, Verna knows the room's been opened. She knew before that, Wren said. She sat down on the step beside her great-aunt. She knew the week I bought it. Della, somebody dug up the box in the orchard before I ever got here. The box was empty. Somebody took the real key and put the stone back. Somebody's been watching this farm waiting on it. And the day I put my name on the paper, they made their move. Della lowered her hands. But why? She said. Why now? Why a house nobody wanted? Because nobody wanted it while it was just a sad old empty place, Wren said. It only became dangerous the day somebody started living in it. The day somebody might open the room. The day the truth might come up out of the ground. She looked out at the orchard, at the third apple tree, at the stone she had rolled away. Verna spent 17 years making sure I'd never know who I was. And then I went and bought the one house in the world where the whole story was written down and locked behind a door. I didn't buy a farm, Della. I walked into the middle of the one thing she'd spent her life keeping from me. And she's been trying to get the deed back ever since, so she could lock it all up again, bury it again, sell it off to nobody and let it rot another 10 years. Della stared at her. How do you know all that? She whispered. You're 17. Because I've watched her do it small for 13 years, Wren said. A spot on a plate, a spot on a bedspread, a spot on me. She spent 13 years rubbing at the truth trying to make it gone. This is just the same thing. She stood up. Bigger, but the same thing. And I'm tired of being the spot Della. I'm done being the thing somebody tries to rub out. That night, Wren walked to town in the long blue dusk, and Roy Tarbell unlocked the store for her, though it was past closing, and he took one look at her face and did not ask. He led her to the back room past the seed bins and the dry goods, gentle with a hand at her elbow, the way he'd led his own grandmother across ice. And he showed her the black telephone on the wall with its long curling cord. And he set a glass of water on the stool beside it. And he said, "Anybody comes to the door, they can come back tomorrow." And he went out and shut the door. But Wren did not pick up the telephone first. First, she opened the spiral notebook she had carried from town in the bottom of her bag, the one thing of paper she owned. And she took out the things she had spent the last 2 days gathering, because she had not been idle while she fed the old man and washed his hands. She had been a girl who could not put a question down, and a question followed far enough becomes a case. She had the family page of the Bible. Amos Garrett Whitmore, born 1908. Cleo Iris Whitmore, born 1939. She had the mason jars from the cellar, with Della's labels going back 10 years proof in glass that a dead man had been eating all that while. She had the torn photograph, half a laughing face, her own face, CL56, and she had copied out in her own small, careful hand the names and the dates that proved Amos Whitmore had no nephew anywhere in the world, only a sister and a daughter and a granddaughter, and that the man Tobias Crane claimed to represent did not exist and never had. And she had one thing more, the thing Della had brought up from the cellar. That afternoon, white-faced from a tin Amos had kept down there in the dark all these years. A bundle of letters tied with string. Cleo's letters to her father. Postmarked Chicago. Years of them. Proof in a dead girl's living hand that Cleo Whitmore had not drowned, had not vanished, had not died. That she was a real woman in a real city who had written Daddy, "I am well, the rent is paid." And Daddy, she would be 6 now. I think of her every day, and who could, if she chose, walk into a courthouse and be counted among the living. It was not a lawyer's case. Wren knew that. She was 17 and she had no money. And the other side had a man with a leather case and a woman with town money behind him. But it was enough. It was enough to make a slow, honest sheriff slower still about signing anything. It was enough to make a lie expensive. And expensive, Wren had decided, was the only language Verna had ever spoken. Then she picked up the telephone. But she did not call Chicago. Not yet. There was an order to things, and Wren had thought it through on the long walk in the dusk. The way she thought through everything, one careful step at a time. She called the number. Della had given her a number in town. The lumberyard family's number, the number of the house with the clean car in the drive. It rang twice. And a voice she had not heard in 10 days. A voice that had lived in her ears for 13 years. The voice that had said, "There's a spot," and slid a window shut. Said, "Halladay Residence." "It's Wren," she said. The silence on the line was so complete she could hear the long-distance hum behind it. And there was no long distance. Verna was 3 miles away. "Wren," Verna said at last. And the voice was different than Wren had ever heard it. Smaller. "Where are you? Are you all right?" You sent a lawyer to my house, Verna," Wren said. "You made up a nephew out of paper to take it back. You've been trying to take it back since the day I bought it." She kept her voice quiet. "I know what's in it now. I found the room. I found the letters. I found Cleo. A breath. And I found Amos. He's alive, Verna. He's been alive the whole time. And he knows your lawyer's face." The sound that came down the line then was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when a thing they have spent their whole life believing was buried sits up in its grave. A long, broken breath and then nothing. And then a voice gone thin as paper. He's alive. He's alive, and he's mine to look after now. And the house is mine, Verna. And I'm keeping it. And you're gonna call off your lawyer and you're never gonna send another one. Because if you do, I will walk into Sheriff Pickett's office with a Bible and a tin of letters and a county's worth of mason jars. And I will tell the whole story out loud in the daylight in front of everybody who spent 17 years pretending they didn't already half know it. I'll tell them what your mother did in a car at the end of a lane in 56. I'll tell them whose porch a baby got left on in 59. I'll tell all of it. And you can spend your town money fighting me, or you can let me keep the one thing I've ever owned in my life. Those are the kindnesses on offer. It was Crane's own line turned around and handed back, and Wren had chosen it on purpose. And on the other end of the line, she heard Verna understand that it had been chosen on purpose. And then Wren Halladay began to cry. It was not the crying of a woman caught. Wren had braced for that, for the slick, fast tears of a person trying to climb back out of a thing. This was something else. This was the crying of a woman who has carried a stone uphill for 13 years and has just been told by the last voice in the world she expected to hear it from that she can set it down. I'm coming out there, Verna said. Tomorrow. I'm not coming to fight you, Wren. I'll call Crane off tonight. I'll call him off the second I hang up this phone. I'm coming to There Are Things. There are things I have to give you. Things I should have given you years ago. Will you? The voice broke clean. Will you let me come? Wren looked at the wall in front of her, at the calendar Roy had pinned there, at the small, careful work of a man's whole quiet life. And she thought of a girl on a doormat in February. And she thought of 13 years of plates with no spots. And she thought that the difference between her and Verna, the only difference that had ever mattered, was that Wren had never once been able to rub a thing out, and that this here now was where that turned from a wound into the only thing that could save them both. Write to me first, Wren said. And then, because she heard the woman's breath catch, no, come tomorrow. Come in the afternoon. But Verna, you'll sit on the step. You don't come in. Not yet. I'll sit on the step, Verna said. I'll sit on the step the rest of my life if you want. Thank you. Thank you, Wren. Wren hung up. She sat on the stool in the back room with her hand on the receiver for a moment. Then she squared the notebook on her knee, and she lifted the receiver again, and she gave the long-distance operator a number in Chicago. Because Verna was tomorrow's problem, and tomorrow's problem could wait for tomorrow. There was a woman in a city she had never seen who did not know. Her father was dead. Did not know. Her daughter was grown. Did not know that the old man she had left behind was alive and waiting in a kept room. And Wren Halladay had decided on the long blue walk into town that she was done with waiting rooms. She had spent her whole life inside one. She would not leave another living soul standing in one a single hour longer than she had to. The line clicked. Clicked again. Clicked a third time the way long-distance lines did in 1974, routing the call through 3 exchanges to find the one city out of all the cities. And then it rang. Once. Twice. A man picked up a tired, heavy voice with the worn-down edge of 30 years behind a grill. Vincenzo's. Wren's heart was going so hard, she could feel it in her teeth. I'm calling for Cleo, she said. Cleo Whitmore. A pause. Cleo, you mean Cleo back in the kitchen. Hold on. The receiver clunked down on something hard. And 900 miles away through a wire, Wren could hear a diner plate stacking a grill hissing. Somebody laughing about something. A song on a jukebox so faint and so far it was barely a song at all. Footsteps. A woman's voice in the background. Cleo telephone. A pause. Then footsteps coming closer. The receiver lifted. A breath against the mouthpiece. And a woman's voice said, "This is Cleo." Wren opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. And the words came out before she chose them came out, the way water comes out of a pump when the handle's been waiting long enough. "I'm calling from the farm." The silence on the other end was so total that Wren thought the line had died. And then very small a sound. Not a word. The sound a person makes when they have stopped breathing without meaning to, and have only just now remembered to start again. "Which farm?" the woman said. And the voice had gone thin, and there was a scrape behind it. The sound of a person sliding down a wall in a back hallway, and not knowing yet that they were doing it. "Your father's farm," Wren said. "The Whitmore farm, in Nebraska. I live here now." A long, ragged breath. "Who is this?" Cleo said. And Wren looked at the calendar on the wall and she said, "My name is Wren Halladay." The line went so quiet Wren could hear the long-distance hum behind it. The sound of 900 miles of copper wire. And then she heard the woman start to cry. Not loud, quiet. The way a person cries who has held a thing inside her body for 17 years and has just been given by a single sentence down a wire permission to set it down. "Oh," Cleo said. Just that. "Oh." Wren closed her eyes and the empty thing in her chest. The thing that had not cried in the middle of a gravel road 3 days into the rest of her life. The thing that had stayed dry through a torn photograph. And an old man rising out of a hole in the floor. The empty thing filled all the way up to the brim and over. "You're 17, Cleo said. "Yes." "You're 17 years old. Are you all right? Are you God? Are you all right?" "I'm all right." Wren laughed wet small. "My bread comes out crooked. But I'm all right." A sound on the other end, half a laugh, half a sob. "You bought my father's farm. For $40. It's a long story." "With what?" "With $40. And Wren did laugh then. "I had 42. I've got 2 left. And across 900 miles of wire." Wren heard a thing she did not expect. She heard the woman laugh, a real laugh, breaking up through the crying. A laugh that came up out of her like a creek, coming up out of the ground. Exactly the way Della had said it would. Exactly the way it had come up out of a 16-year-old girl in a yard in 1955 in a photograph torn in half and buried under a stone. "Cleo," Wren said when the laugh had quieted. "I have to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it gentle, so I'm just gonna say it. There are 2 things. Tell me, your father..." Wren steadied herself. "The whole county thinks Amos died 10 years ago. Cleo, he didn't. He's alive. He's here. He's in the house right now. He's not well. His mind has gone a long way down a road. But he's alive and he kept your room. He kept your room exactly the way you left it, for 10 years in the dark behind a door he locked from the inside. He's been waiting for you to come home. He thinks you're coming any day. He keeps the room ready." The silence this time was different. It was the silence of a person standing very still in a back hallway of a diner in Chicago, while the entire shape of the last 17 years rearranges itself around them. "He's alive," Cleo whispered. Daddy's alive. He's alive, and he needs you. And there's a second thing. Wren made herself say it. Eli's dead. My father. He died when I was 4 a long time ago. I'm sorry to tell you down a telephone. But you didn't know, and you've gone 17 years not knowing, and I won't add another day to it." "I knew," Cleo said, and the voice went strange. "I knew. I came back. 3 years ago, I got it into my head I'd come back. Not to take you, not to undo any of it, just to see you once from across the street. I got on the bus. I got to town. I went to the diner where I used to work, and the woman running it now told me Amos had been gone 10 years and Eli longer than that, and that you were being raised in town. And a breath. I couldn't get out of the booth. I sat in that booth for 2 hours, and then I got back on the bus, and I went home. Because I thought there was nothing left. I thought everyone was gone. I thought I was 3 years too late for a man who was already 10 years dead." Her voice cracked all the way through. "And he was alive. He was alive the whole time, 3 miles down a gravel road keeping my room. He's alive," Wren said. "And I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. And I'm asking you to come home, Cleo. To see the farm. To see what's left of him while there's still some of him left to see. And to see me. If you can stand it. If you would." The silence on the line this time was the silence of a person making a decision. "Yes," Cleo said. "Yes, I'll come. I have to give notice. I have rent. Give me till Thanksgiving. I can be there by Thanksgiving. Sooner if I can." "All right. Wren." "Yes. Don't change anything. The room. Leave it the way it is until I get there. And," the voice broke once more and came back steadier, "and tell my father, tell him Cleo's coming home. Tell him today. Tell him every day. Tell him I'm on my way. I'll tell him every day," Wren said. "All right. All right, my girl." Wren closed her eyes. My girl. She had not, in 17 years on the earth, been called my girl. Not once. "All right," she said. When she came out of the back room, Roy Tarbell was at the counter polishing a jar of pickles that did not need polishing, and he had been polishing it by the look of him the entire time. He set it down. He looked at her. "She's coming," Wren said, and Roy Tarbell, who had stood behind that counter 41 years and seen 1,000 kinds of trouble walk through his door, came around the counter and put one heavy, careful hand on the girl's shoulder, the way a man touches something he is afraid of breaking, and he said, "Then we've got work to do, haven't we? Getting that house ready." "We do. All right then." He squeezed her shoulder once and let go and turned away so she would not see his face, and busied himself with the lamp. "Take that roll of butterscotch on your way out. I won't have you walking home in the dark with nothing in your pocket." She took the butterscotch, and this time at the door with her hand on the latch and the bell ready to ring, she stopped, and she turned back and she said it. "Thank you, Roy." The old man at the counter didn't turn around, but Wren saw his shoulders move once, and she heard him say low to the lamp. He was pretending to fix, "Go on home, honey. Go on home to your people." The autumn that followed was the strangest and the fullest of Wren Halladay's life, because for the first time she had a thing to wait for. And waiting for a thing changes a person down to the bone. Verna came that first afternoon as she'd said, and she sat on the step as she'd been told. And she did not come in. She was not done up the way she had always been done up. The hair was not set. The lipstick was not on. She wore a plain navy dress and flat shoes, and she carried a wooden box the size of a shoebox, and she looked smaller than Wren had ever seen her, smaller and older and tired in a way Wren had not known the woman's face could be. She did not ask to come in. She set the box on the porch boards and slid it across to Wren. And inside were letters, dozens of them tied in 3 bundles with white string in the slanted living hand of Cleo Whitmore. Letters Cleo had written to Eli after she left. Some sent, some not. Letters Verna had found in the bottom of Eli's toolbox after he died, and had kept and had read every one again and again for 13 years. Why? Wren asked her. Why keep them? Why read them over and over? Because I was punishing myself, Verna said. She looked out at the orchard, not at Wren. And because some part of me wanted to know what he'd felt. What she'd felt. What I never was to him. She put her hand flat on the porch board. He never loved me, Wren. He married me. He was kind to me. He never raised his hand or his voice. He was a good husband in every way a man can be a good husband. But the one that matters, he loved her. He loved her the whole time, and I knew it. And I sat 4 rows up from her in church every Sunday, with you in her arms behind me, and the whole back of my neck was on fire, because everybody in that building knew it too. She closed her eyes. And then she left you on our step. And I should have looked at you and seen a child who needed loving. And instead, every single time I looked at you for 13 years, I saw her. I saw her in your eyes and your hair, and the way you stood at the screen door looking at the rain, and I could not get past it. I tried. God knows I want you to believe I tried. But she was in the house, and he was in the house, and I was the 3rd one in my own home with a child who wasn't mine, and a husband who wasn't mine. And I was so afraid you'd grow up and become her and leave me. 2, that I tried to make you leave first, before you could choose to. Wren sat with that. The chickens scratched in the yard. A grasshopper went from one fence post to another. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Wren said finally. I know. And it's no excuse. It's an explanation. There's a difference, and I want you to know I know the difference. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I haven't earned it, and I won't pretend I have. I'm telling you why. Because you're owed the why. You took it out on a child. I took it out on a child. It was never my fault. It was never one single solitary thing your fault. Verna said, and her voice broke. Not the day you were born, and not any day since. Wren looked at her hands. The Whitmore hands, the knuckle that went up too high on the pointer finger. The hands Verna had once called ugly. And she thought of her father's letter, for there had been a letter. Verna brought it the 2nd time she came, a thing Eli had written the week before he died. And Verna had hidden for 13 years out of a grief and a guilt too tangled to name. Wren had read it alone at the kitchen table by lamplight. Be braver than I was, sweet pea. Don't let me be the reason you don't trust love. I was a coward at it. But love is the realest thing there is, and it's the only thing worth being brave for. She had folded it and put it in the spiral notebook with everything else. And she had said out loud to a photograph on the shelf, I hear you, Daddy. She had not said, I forgive you. She was not sure yet that she did. But she had said, I hear you, and for now, that was a floor she could stand on. I'm not going to forgive you today, Wren told Verna. I'm not asking you to. I might someday. I don't know. But I want you to know one thing. Wren turned and looked at her full on for the first time in the whole conversation. I would not have grown up to leave you. If you'd let me be your daughter, I would have stayed. I would have been good to you. That's the thing you were so afraid of. And it was never going to happen because I am not her. I'm not Cleo and I'm not Eli. I'm the one good thing that came out of all of it, and I would have stayed. Verna put her hand over her mouth and she stood up and went to the porch rail and bent over it. and her shoulders shook. And Wren did not get up. And Wren did not go to her. But Wren did not send her away either. And when Verna had straightened and wiped her face, she said, "Can I come back? Sometime? Not soon. Not to push. Just sometime." And Wren considered it a long moment and then said, "Write to me first. Don't just come." And Verna said, "I'll write," and got in her clean car and drove away down the track, and that for now was that. The rest of the autumn, Wren worked. Roy Tarbell came out on Sundays with lumber from the yard. Bought, he said gruffly, at his own cost, and would hear no argument about it. And the two of them, the 64-year-old storekeeper and the 17-year-old girl, patched the roof and rehung the barn door and replaced the well pump. Della came near every day, and the old man got better. Not all the way better, that road did not run all the way back, and Wren knew it and made her peace with it. But better. The sun and the food and the small ordinary kindnesses brought a little more of Amos Whitmore up out of the dark each week. He learned Wren's name. He sat on the porch in the afternoons and watched the chickens, and sometimes he told her things about Cleo at 6, at 10, at 16. Scattered and out of order, a man laying out the pieces of a life he'd kept too long in the dark. And every single day, morning and evening, Wren knelt by his chair and told him, "Cleo's coming home. She's on her way. She'll be here by Thanksgiving." And every day his ruined face did the same thing, a slow dawning like the sun coming up over the eastern fence. And every day he said, "She's coming back. I knew she'd come back. I kept the room." The room stayed open. Wren never closed the cold door again. The cellar she filled in herself with Roy's help, the trapdoor nailed shut, and the rug rolled away, because she would not have the old man able to crawl back down into the dark, and because she would not have the house keep a hole in it any longer. The room above it she dusted and aired and left exactly as Cleo had left it. The quilt squared the curtain. Wren opened the curtain now, mornings, and let the sun in and closed it nights, the way you do for a room somebody's coming home to. And she learned to bake bread. It was the hardest thing she learned. The first loaf was a brick. The second was a brick with a hollow in it, somehow worse. The third came out flat as a wagon wheel. And then Della found the green cookbook on the shelf in Cleo's room, Cleopas Whitmore. 1953, written inside the cover in a 15-year-old's loops. The bread page worn gray at the corner from a girl's own floured thumb. And Wren measured careful and kneaded until it's smooth as a child's cheek, the book said. And the fourth loaf came out tall and brown, and just a little crooked on one side. And Wren stood at the kitchen window and laughed out loud at the most beautiful crooked loaf of bread she had ever seen in her life. And she thought, wait till she sees this. Wait till my mother sees this. The bus from Chicago pulled into the town square at 14 minutes past 4 on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It was an ordinary bus, silver dusty from the road, and the driver opened the door and the people came off a young man with a duffel, a woman with 2 grandchildren in matching coats, an old man with a cane, and then a woman 35 years old, hair pulled back in a low knot, a brown wool coat that had seen better decades, a battered suitcase in one hand with a faded sticker on the side, and in the other a small cloth bag pulled shut with a drawstring. She stepped off the bus. She stood on the sidewalk a moment. She looked around the town square, the same square she had not stood in for 17 years. And she breathed in and she breathed out, and she started walking. Wren was on the porch. She had been on the porch all afternoon. She had put on the dress Della had helped her sew on the old machine in the front room, a simple cream cotton dress with a soft collar. She had put her hair up the way Della showed her. The bread was on the kitchen table, tall and brown, and almost embarrassingly perfect. The chickens were fed. The fire was banked. The kettle was on. And the old man sat in the rocker by the window, washed and combed in a clean shirt in the last of the afternoon light. And Wren had told him that morning and again at noon, "She's coming today. Cleo's coming today," and he had nodded, and he had said, "I kept the room," and he had not stopped watching the gate since. At 4:30, Wren saw a figure walking up the gravel road. It paused at the gate. It set down a suitcase. It stood very still. The way Wren herself had stood very still the first time she walked up this drive, and it looked at the house at the wisteria, at the porch, at the chickens, at the orchard down the slope. And then it looked at the porch, and it saw the girl in the cream dress. And then it saw through the window beside her the shape of an old man in a rocking chair, and the figure made a sound that carried all the way across the yard, a sound with no word in it, and pushed open the gate and came up the track slow like a woman who had walked this path in her mind every night for 17 years, and could not quite believe her feet were doing it now in daylight. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She set the suitcase down. She held the cloth bag against her chest. She looked up at Wren, and Wren looked down at her, and for a long moment neither of them could speak at all. It was Cleo who spoke first. "You grew up," she said. "You grew up just like me." Wren's mouth worked. It took her 2 tries. "My bread's still a little crooked," she said, and Cleo Whitmore held up the cloth bag, and the tears were running freely down her face, and she was laughing through them, the creek coming up out of the ground. "I brought sourdough starter," she said. "I came to fix it." And then the screen door behind Wren scraped open, and the old man came out onto the porch on his own 2 legs, one hand on the door frame swaying. And he looked down the steps at the woman standing in the yard, and the whole long, dark road inside his ruined head ran backward all at once into the light. And Amos Whitmore said in a voice gone suddenly clear, suddenly young, suddenly whole, "Cleo, you came home." And Cleo Whitmore looked up at her father. Alive, alive 3 years too late, and 17 years too late, and not in the end too late at all. And her legs went out from under her, and she sat down right there in the dirt at the bottom of the steps, and put her hands over her face, and wept. And Wren came down the steps, and the old man came down behind her, slow, one hand on the rail. And the 3 of them, the grandfather who had kept the room, the mother who had walked away, and the daughter who had been left on a doormat and grown up loud as her name. The 3 of them came together at the bottom of the porch steps in the last gold light of a Nebraska afternoon. 3 pairs of Whitmore hands, the knuckle that went up too high on the pointer finger holding on. Nobody said anything for a long while. They didn't have to. The chickens kept scratching. The wisteria moved in the soft November wind. The kettle on the stove began its slow rising whistle, and inside on the table a loaf of bread sat cooling tall and brown, and not in the end crooked at all. There was no music. There was no swelling. There was just a porch and a kettle and the long, quiet, ordinary beginning of a life that had been waiting on every side of a locked door to begin the kind of beginning that does not announce itself, the kind that simply starts and keeps on. The cold door at the end of the hall stood open behind them, and the late sun came in through Cleo's window and fell across the squared quilt and the bookshelf and the pencil drawing of a horse, and it warmed the room all the way through, and it was not cold anymore, and it would never be locked again.